These three true off-grid horror stories are inspired by true events. We follow a group of friends, a young family, and three student hikers whose final moments defy all logical explanation. First, we explore how a group of 5 friends could abandon a perfectly good car in a snowstorm, leading one to inexplicably starve to death in a cabin that was filled with food. Next, we watch haunting footage of a family loading their truck in a strange robotic trance before driving into the Oregon woods, where they simply cease to exist. And finally, we examine over 70 frantic photos taken by 3 students on an adventure, documenting something moving around them in the pitch-black jungle. The wilderness doesn't have to hunt you. Sometimes, all it has to do is wait for you to break yourself. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to be alone for this. The wind made a low, ugly sound as it blew across the high mountain pass, a constant pressure against the ears. It was March 15th, 1976, 5 days after 5 friends had disappeared into a storm that had buried the world in white. A search party on snowmobiles cut their engines, the sudden silence making the landscape feel even bigger, even emptier. Ahead of them was a dark shape sticking out of a deep snowdrift. The cold was so sharp, it felt like it could break a bone. The shape was a car, a Ford Mercury, its faded green paint mostly hidden. The lead investigator, a man named Henderson, got off his snowmobile. The crunch of his boots on the frozen ground was the only sound. He was a man who had seen a lot, but a cold feeling that had nothing to do with the temperature began to creep up his spine. Something was profoundly wrong here. He approached the car slowly. The wind whistled softly through a window that was cracked open just an inch, a detail that screamed out of place. Why would anyone leave a window open in a blizzard? The car itself was pristine. No dents, no broken glass, no sign of a struggle. Henderson put a gloved hand on the freezing handle and pulled. The door was unlocked. A puff of stale, cold air escaped, carrying no scent but the dead smell of vinyl. On the passenger seat, a program from the basketball game lay slightly crumpled, a flimsy piece of paper that was the last remnant of a happy, normal night. The keys were gone. A look at the fuel gauge showed the tank was nearly full. The professional part of Henderson's brain searched for a logical explanation, a prank, a second vehicle, anything. But the human part of him, the part that understood fear, knew he was looking at the start of something terrible. It was a perfectly good car, and 5 young men had simply walked away from it into a frozen hell. Henderson's team pointed their flashlights into the woods. The beams cut through the blowing snow, but all they saw was an endless, repeating pattern of white drifts and dark trees. There were no tracks, no sign of where the men had gone. Just 5 days earlier, everything was different. A small town in southeastern Colorado was celebrating a big win. Their college basketball team had just won the state championship. The 5 friends at the heart of the team, Mark, Kevin, David, Robert, and Michael, were local heroes. The gym had been filled with the sound of cheers and the squeak of sneakers on the court. After the game, the 5 of them piled into Mark's Mercury. Mark was at the center of things, same as always. He owned the car, he drove, he was the one they all looked to. But even in the middle of a celebration, there was a part of him that was somewhere else. It was the result of a rough upbringing, something that left a quiet, coiled tension inside him. His friends knew it. They knew his plans could change in an instant, for reasons he never explained. Their plan was simple: get some burgers and then go home. As they drove through town, the streetlights cast a warm glow on the falling snow. A popular song was on the radio. They were happy. But somewhere on that short drive, that coiled tension in Mark snapped into a decision. He turned off the main road. He left the lights of town behind and drove up a steep, winding road into the mountains, heading directly into the storm. Back on the mountain, Henderson was about to call it a day when a young deputy spotted something. At the edge of the road, barely visible, were footprints. They were messy, like the tracks of men who were running or stumbling. The team followed them. The trail didn't lead back down the mountain to safety. It went up, deeper into the forest. That trek was a special kind of nightmare. The snow was waist-deep in places, a thick, heavy powder that fought them with every step. The wind was a physical force, pushing them, screaming at them, stealing the breath from their lungs. The landscape was a hypnotic, terrifying loop of white and black. For hours they walked, the only sound their own ragged breathing and the endless howl of the wind. A heavy sense of dread settled over the search party. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. This was a mission to find out how a tragedy had happened. The trail they followed made no sense. It wasn't the path of men seeking shelter. It was the path of men running from something. Finally, after a grueling 20 miles, the trail ended at a small trailer in a clearing. It was an old Forest Service cabin, deserted for the winter. The place was dead quiet. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath here. The windows were dark and empty. They had to force the door open. It broke with a loud crack that echoed unnaturally in the silence. The air inside was freezing, thick with the smell of dust and something else, something faintly sour. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. It revealed a thick layer of dust coating a small table, a few chairs, and a pantry shelf. On the shelf, cans of food were stacked in neat rows, all of them sealed, all of them covered in the same gray dust. The light swept past them and landed on a makeshift bed in the corner. A man was lying on it, wrapped tightly in a wool blanket. It was Robert, one of the 5 missing men. He was shockingly thin. His skin was stretched tight against his bones. Later, the coroner confirmed he had starved to death. But that wasn't the most horrifying part. The horror was in the silence, in the dust, in the neat rows of cans. Robert had been in a shelter. He had been surrounded by more than enough food and water to survive for months. Yet he had died of starvation. His blanket was tucked neatly around him, as if he had simply, quietly decided to lay down and die. In the end, there were no real answers. As the spring thaw came, the bodies of Michael and David were found scattered miles apart, their remains claimed by the wilderness. Mark, the leader who had made that fateful turn, was never found. Neither was Kevin. There were no signs of an attack, no evidence of foul play, no footprints other than their own. The official case was closed, but the story never ends. It always comes back to that cold, silent trailer. It comes back to the image of a young man withering away, just a few feet from a shelf full of food. What did they see on that mountain? What whisper on the wind was so terrifying that it made them run from warmth, from safety, and from their own survival? The mountain doesn't talk, and the mystery remains, frozen in time, a quiet, chilling testament to a fear with no name. Some places are quiet, and some places are silent. The forests in southwest Oregon are silent. It's a kind of stillness that makes the small sounds, a leaf rustling, a twig snapping far off, seem loud and out of place. It's a silence that feels like it's waiting for something. It was in that suffocating stillness that a hunter named Stewart found a truck that had been forgotten by the world. The vehicle was parked on a lonely logging road, one that was hardly ever used anymore, and it was covered in a thick layer of dirt and pine needles. It looked like it had been sitting there for a long time. Stewart, a man who had known these woods his whole life, felt a prickle of unease. People don't leave trucks like this out here. He moved toward it slowly, his boots crunching on the dry gravel. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and pine. As he got closer, he could see the inside. The doors were unlocked. He pulled on the handle, and the door opened with a low groan of metal. He peered inside. The keys were gone, but a strange collection of items had been left behind. It was a scene frozen in time. On the front seat, a couple of coats were thrown, like the owners had just taken them off and planned to be right back. On the floor was a purse, and inside he could see wallets and identification. On the dashboard, a child's toy, a little plastic doll, was lying on its back, staring with painted eyes up at the sky. But the worst part was in the back. Curled up on the floor was a small brown dog. It was shivering, nothing but skin and bones, and when it saw him, it let out a soft, weak whimper. The dog was starving and had almost died from dehydration. There was no sign of a fight. No blood, no broken glass, nothing to point to violence. It was like the family that belonged to the truck, a father, a mother, and their little girl, had just stopped, gotten out of the vehicle, and walked straight into the woods to be swallowed by them. Stewart called the police. The search started right away, but the forest didn't give up any secrets. There were no footprints to follow, no broken branches, no signs of a camp. There was nothing at all. Just the truck, the dog, and the deep, unsettling feeling that something had gone terribly wrong out there. The story of the Reed family, however, didn't begin on that logging road. It began weeks earlier, back in their normal life in Portland. On September 15, 2004, Benjamin, his wife Harper, and their daughter Isabella were seen on their own home security camera packing that same truck. That footage captured the last time anyone saw them, and though the video had no sound, what it showed was deeply disturbing. Benjamin and Harper moved with a strange slowness. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't even look at each other. They walked back and forth from the house to the truck with blank faces, their bodies moving in a stiff, mechanical way. They looked like they were in some kind of trance, just going through the motions without any thought or feeling. They loaded the truck with regular camping gear, sleeping bags, a cooler, boxes of food. But then Benjamin carried something else out of the house. It was a thick, black briefcase, and it looked heavy. He carefully placed it in the back seat of the truck. A moment later, he came back with something small and dark, which he tucked away out of sight. From the shape of it, it looked like a handgun. That briefcase and that handgun were never seen again. Friends and family would later tell police they had been worried about the Reeds. For months, the couple had grown obsessed with a dark topic: death. They talked about it in strange, quiet ways. They became convinced that their own house was haunted. They told their pastor that they felt a presence there, something evil. Something in that house, or something inside their own minds, had been pushing them toward this one final trip into the woods. For 4 years, nothing happened. The case went cold. The trail of the Reed family didn't just disappear. It was like it had never existed at all. The story turned into a local legend, a ghost story you tell around a campfire about the family that drove into the forest and simply vanished off the face of the earth. The world moved on and started to forget. But in November of 2008, the story came rushing back. Less than 3 miles from where the truck had been found, a pair of deer hunters stumbled onto something that made the cold run down their spines. In a shallow ravine, hidden under a tangle of overgrown brush, they saw bones. 3 sets of them, all human. They were huddled close together, as if the people had been seeking warmth from each other in their final moments. The authorities were called, and dental records soon confirmed the worst. The remains belonged to Benjamin Harper and 6-year-old Isabella Reed. The discovery answered the one question of where they were, but it opened up 1,000 more. How did they die? The medical examiner went over every piece of bone, every scrap of clothing found at the scene. The final report was maddening. The results were inconclusive. There were no signs of an attack, no broken bones, no bullet holes, no marks of any kind. The examiner could find no cause of death. They had just died. Huddled together in a ditch 3 miles from their truck. That total lack of answers created a vacuum, and terrifying theories rushed in to fill it. The most common theory was that it was a drug deal that went bad. After all, police had found $43,000 in cash hidden inside the truck. That was a lot of money for a family that didn't seem to have much. But the theory had problems. Why would loving parents bring their 6-year-old daughter to a dangerous drug deal in the middle of nowhere? And if they were robbed and killed, why would the killers leave behind $43,000? It just didn't add up. Then there was the theory of a family feud. Benjamin had been in a nasty lawsuit with his own father. He had even filed for a protective order, claiming his father had threatened him. The police looked at the father hard, but he was eventually cleared. The bad blood was real, but there was no proof it led to 3 people dying in the woods. A third theory, pushed by Harper's mother, was even darker. She believed the family had been targeted by a strange religious cult in the area. This idea gained some traction when a tip came in that a local white supremacist group had a hit list, and Harper's name was on it. But again, there was no solid evidence to back it up. And finally, there was the last, most disturbing possibility: murder-suicide. Harper had a history of bipolar disorder, and police found an angry, 14-page letter she had written to a friend, full of rage and paranoia. With their strange behavior on the video and the handgun they brought with them, it was a grim picture. Could the pressure have become too much? Friends and family rejected it completely. They said the Reeds were loving parents, devoted to their daughter. But the image of them on that video, with those blank, empty eyes, makes you wonder what was truly going on in their heads. The Reed family disappearance is still officially unsolved. Their story is a cold reminder of how thin the line is between the normal world and something else. They drove down a dirt road on a cool September day and simply walked away from everything. Their bones were found, but their last moments are a terrifying secret, one that was buried with them in the soil of that silent Oregon forest. The real horror isn't a monster or a ghost. It's the simple, unbelievable fact that a family can just walk into the unknown, and we will never, ever know why. The air in the Daintree rainforest was thick. It was so heavy with moisture, you felt like you were breathing water, and it smelled of wet dirt and strange flowers. High above the canopy, the steady whump, whump, whump of a search helicopter beat down. It was a sound that was right on top of you, but couldn't help a soul down on the ground. Below, a small search team moved through the mess of green. They moved slow and careful, and when they spoke, their words just vanished into the quiet. The lead searcher, a local guy who knew these woods, stopped dead. He put up a hand and his team went still. He got down on one knee next to some ferns, pushed them aside, and there it was, a backpack. It was just a regular pack, worn from use, sitting there perfectly. Looked like someone just set it down for a minute and walked off. Not like they were running from something. Just calm. Inside there was a little bit of cash, an empty water bottle, and a small digital camera. It was the first real clue they'd found of the 3 Polish students who'd gone missing weeks back. It was a strange, quiet clue that held the whole story. The first pictures on the camera were from March 1st, 2011. They showed 3 university students, smiling, excited to be out in the middle of nowhere. There was Marcin and Anna, a young couple always close together. And with them was their friend Natalia. She was a free spirit, the kind of person who always had to see what was just around the next corner, pushing things a little further than she should. They all looked happy, sure of themselves. They wanted a real adventure, something off the map. The locals told them to stick to the marked trails, told them it wasn't safe. The main guide, an older man with tired eyes, pointed them specifically away from an old, unmapped path called the Ancients' Walk. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at them with a serious face and said, "That path is not for you. You don't belong there." They smiled, thanked him for the advice, and went that way anyway. They figured they'd be back by dark. They had one small backpack between them, the camera and their phones. The last sound of the civilized world they heard was that guide's voice, a warning they chose to ignore. The camera told the story of what happened next, but it started slow. The next batch of photos was from later that same day. The sun was getting low, turning the bright green leaves a darker shade. They were still smiling in the pictures, but it was a tired smile now. You could tell they were pushing on, heading deeper in when they should have been turning back to make it out by nightfall. It was the first small mistake, the kind you don't even notice you're making until it's too late. Then came the photos from the next day, March 2nd. The smiles were completely gone. They didn't look panicked, not yet, just serious. At this point, the camera wasn't for fun anymore. It had become a tool. They started taking pictures of strange-looking trees, of dry creek beds, of the sky through the canopy. They were trying to document their path, to create their own map out of pictures since the real one was useless. Every click of the shutter was a desperate attempt to leave a breadcrumb, a small sign to prove which way they'd gone in a place where everything looked the same. You can see this seriousness in one picture of Marcin, staring down at his paper map, while Anna and Natalia are in the background, looking in opposite directions. It's the moment you can see them realizing that being off the path was another word for being lost. By March 3rd, the look on their faces had changed for good. That's when the real fear showed up in the pictures they were taking of each other. Their faces were dirty and their eyes were wide. The jungle itself started to look different in the photos, darker, more hostile. You could almost feel the quiet pressing in, the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound like a freight train. For 10 days, from March 1st to the 11th, their phones told the same story. Call logs showed one failed attempt after another to reach the outside world. No signal. One of the phones finally died, its last sound a weak, final beep. The other phone stayed on for a while longer. Someone would turn it on, try to unlock it, but kept putting in the wrong pin. Was it one of them, hands shaking too much to get it right? Or was someone else holding the phone? The pictures didn't say. The only sounds in their world were the pounding in their chests and the rustle of leaves every time they forced themselves to move. Then came the last set of pictures. They were all taken on the night of March 8th, between 11 p.m. and 2 in the morning. Over 70 photos, one after another, all taken with the bright white flash. The only sounds for those 3 hours would have been the sharp click of the camera, a quick electronic whine as the flash recharged, and then total, complete blackness again. Most of the pictures were a mess, blurry shapes and darkness, but a few of them were clear, and they were terrifying. The person with the camera wasn't just taking pictures blindly in panic. They were trying to get a picture of something specific, something that was moving around them in the dark. One photo was of a puddle on the ground, but the flash showed a reflection of something in the trees above. It wasn't a branch. It was a tall, thin shadow that didn't look right. It was just there for a second, caught in the light. Another picture was a close-up of a native plant covered in sharp, hair-like needles, like someone had fallen into it or brushed past it in a hurry. Then there were pictures aimed straight up at the canopy, desperate white flashes into the empty black sky. The very last photo was of an old rock. Scratched onto its surface was a symbol, faint but clear in the flash. The police didn't know what it meant, but they showed it to the local Kuku-Yalanji elders. They knew the symbol. They told the police it was a warning, a simple one. It means, "You are not welcome here." One of the elders explained that some paths are sacred, not because of spirits, but because they lead to places people don't want found, places that are protected. He looked at the photo of the symbol and then at the officer and said, "You were warned to stay away." They were warned too. The official search ended. The jungle was too thick, the weather too bad. The elders told them the area was off limits. Months later, come May and July, searchers found a single hiking boot with a foot still inside it. Later, they found a few other bone fragments scattered down a creek bed. The strange part was how some bones were clean and white, while others weren't, as if they had been there for different amounts of time. The official report closed the case, calling it a hiking accident. But nobody was satisfied with that. How could the backpack and camera be untouched while the bodies were destroyed and scattered? What about those 70 pictures taken in the middle of the night? People online still talk about it. Some say it was foul play, pointing directly at the elders' cryptic warning about the area being protected. Others think they just had an accident and ran into the wrong person at the worst possible time. In the end, only two facts are certain. The camera, with its perfect silent record of their final days, was found without a single scratch on it. And miles away downstream, a few scattered pieces of their bones were picked from the mud. The rest of them were never seen again,